Today I will tell you my story. My name is Clara, I am American, and I never imagined that a common night in January 2023 would change my life forever. It was a cold Friday, and as usual, I was on my couch, endlessly scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Time seemed to fly as I got sucked into an endless cycle of videos and posts, not realizing the hours were passing. Suddenly, a strange dizziness came over me, and before I could get up to get some water, everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I realized I was no longer in my body. I was floating above myself, watching my body lying on the couch with the phone still glowing in my hand. Panic and confusion took over me. Was I dead? I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. Then a blinding light filled the room, cutting through the darkness indescribably. I turned to look at the source of the light, and there was a radiant figure that seemed to emanate a powerful and loving presence. It was not like the images I saw in church or paintings. It was something much more real and overwhelming. Its presence filled the room not only with light but with a love and authority I had never felt before. I wanted to fall to my knees but couldn't move. With a calm gesture, the figure extended its hand towards me. Its voice was calm but carried a weight that left no room for arguments. Without hesitation, I reached out, and as soon as I did, the environment around us disappeared. We found ourselves in a void, though it wasn't really empty. We were surrounded by glowing screens floating in the air, phones, tablets, computers, TVs, and even VR headsets. These screens weren't just devices. They seemed to be alive with something dark. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to notice something deeply unsettling about these floating screens. They weren't simply inanimate objects. There was something sinister looking back at me. Thousands of empty faces, as if they were hypnotized, stared at me from the screens. It was as if their souls had been sucked into these devices. The figure next to me pointed to the screens and said with a voice full of sadness and urgency, "This is a battlefield. The enemy has made these screens his main weapon against your generation." I couldn't fully understand what he meant. To me, it was just technology, just entertainment. But as I looked closer, I saw chains extending from the screens, wrapping around people's wrists, necks, and even their hearts. The chains had words engraved on them like comparison, anxiety, lust, and distraction. These words burned into my mind, showing me that people were chained without even realizing it. The figure turned to me, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "People don't even know they're chained," I whispered, my voice full of disbelief. "That's the enemy's greatest trick," he replied, enslaving them without their knowledge. Suddenly, the screens turned red, flames flickered at the edges, and I saw a terrifying symbol appearing on each screen. It wasn't just on the devices. It started to appear on people's foreheads and hands as if it were being branded into their skin. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure looked at me with a seriousness that made my heart stop. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," he said, "but it is conditioning them to accept it. The enemy is preparing their hearts to worship him instead of me. They are being trained to value approval, convenience, and instant gratification above all else. When the time comes, they will accept the mark without question." My body trembled with fear and regret as his words echoed in my mind, forcing me to reevaluate the role technology played in my life. As I tried to process everything I had seen and heard, the scene around us changed again. Suddenly, we were in a vast war zone. It wasn't a common battlefield with weapons and soldiers, but something much more unsettling. It was full of families, parents, grandparents, children, and teenagers, all standing on one side of the field, but instead of fighting together, they were facing each other. The older generations yelled at the young, accusing them of being lazy, selfish, and addicted to technology. The young, in turn, yelled back, blaming the elders for not understanding their struggles or for creating the problems they now faced. There was a palpable and growing division between them, fueled by hurt and misunderstandings. The radiant figure beside me observed all this with an expression of deep sadness. "They should be united," he said, "but the enemy has turned them against each other. The older generations need to wake up and see that their children and grandchildren are under attack. They must fight for them, not against them." I looked at the figure, desperate for a solution. "But how?" I asked. "What can they do?" He responded with a voice full of compassion and firmness. "They must pray. They must teach my word. They must set an example, placing me above all distractions, even their own." His words echoed in my heart, and as I looked around, I saw adults also glued to their devices, scrolling through news or playing games while their children wandered in the darkness. The next scene I witnessed broke my heart. We were in a church, but it wasn't like any church I had ever attended. The sanctuary was full of people, but most were not paying attention. Some were scrolling on their phones during the service. Others were taking selfies while the pastor preached passionately. The glow of the screens filled the room with an artificial light, muffling the presence of God. The figure next to me spoke with a trembling voice, full of anger and sadness. "This is my house, but it has become a marketplace for distractions. My people no longer seek me with all their hearts. They seek entertainment, validation, and convenience." The sight of that crowded church, but spiritually empty, filled me with a pain I had never felt before. I wanted to scream, cry, beg everyone to wake up and realize what was happening, but my voice failed me. I turned to the radiant figure, desperately seeking answers. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling small and helpless. "I am just a child." The figure placed his hand on my shoulder and looked deeply into my eyes. "You are more than you think you are," he said with a voice full of love and conviction. "You are my messenger. I chose you to warn them, not just your generation, but all generations." His words filled my heart with a weight I had never felt before. It was as if the responsibility of the entire world was on my shoulders. "But they won't listen to me," I said, tears streaming down my face. "They will think I'm crazy." The figure smiled sadly. "They rejected me too," he said. "But some will listen and their eyes will be opened. Speak boldly. Tell them what you saw. Warn them that time is short." At that moment, I felt a fierce determination ignite within me. I didn't know how I would do it, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. In an instant, I was back in my living room. My heart was pounding wildly, and tears were still streaming down my face. The phone in my hand felt different now, cold, heavy, and sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God. I spent the night in prayer like I had never prayed before. I prayed for my friends, my family, my generation, and even for the older generations. I asked God to give me the courage to share what I had seen and warn as many people as possible. With my heart still racing and my face wet with tears, I knew I had a mission ahead of me. The experience I had that night changed my perspective on technology and the impact it was having on our lives. The next morning, I decided to share my story with my parents. I sat with them in the kitchen, where the aroma of coffee filled the air, and told them everything. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to concern, but I saw a spark of understanding in their eyes. I knew it wouldn't be easy to convince people about what I had seen, but I had to try. I started talking to my friends, sharing the vision I had and warning them about the dangers of technology. Some laughed and thought I was exaggerating, but others began to pay more attention to how they spent their time. Feeling the resistance and disbelief was difficult, but I was determined. I felt that I had a greater responsibility now. As I shared my story, I realized I was not alone. Many felt the same emptiness and disconnection that I had felt before. We organized prayer groups and discussions in our community, trying to find ways to reconnect with each other and with God, away from screens. The response was mixed, but there were moments of true connection and change. Small victories that gave me hope that we were making a difference. Over time, I realized that the message I carried was not just about avoiding technology, but about finding a healthy and meaningful balance. The fight against digital distractions was, in fact, a search for something deeper, a desire for purpose, connection, and spirituality. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I knew that this was a continuous journey, and that the true power lay in remaining vigilant and faithful in the search for something greater than ourselves.